All right, what's going on, everybody? As you can tell, there's only two of us here for right now, but Ant should be in a little bit. He's dealing with some stuff back home. There was tornadoes and stuff, so hopefully he's all right. But everybody, this is Joe. Joe, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, man?
Hey, how's it going? I'm Joe Hupp of Joe Hupp Geckos. I primarily do geckos. I've been breeding reptiles for close to 30 years, doing it professionally for about 17, 18. Used to work at the St. Louis Zoo. So, yeah.
Nice.
yeah.
So, I always ask people in the beginning. So, what was like your herp origin story? What got you into reptiles and geckos and everything
Sure.
else?
The first thing when I was a kid, my dad was into tropical fish and he knew that I liked turtles. So we set up like a pen in the backyard for some box turtles, and I'd rotate them in the winter here. And that's basically the start of it. My first gecko was a tokay gecko from a mall pet shop 40-ish years ago. It was forever ago, but yeah, I'm. A lot of people think I'm really mostly a gecko guy. I actually like all animals, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, inverts. I'm really a zoology guy. That's kind of my base, and I also like evolutionary history and paleontology. But for a business, and I do like geckos a lot. Obviously, I have a megaton of them, but it felt like the best route to go because it's something that most of the stuff I do, the general public is going to be able to keep alive and do well with. Doesn't take up massive enclosures. Like we were just chatting about, it's safe to have in a house with my daughter.
Right.
So it was a good decision to go with. And I have a couple of oddball things outside of that. I've got a group of Sri Lankan star tortoises. I've got some rhinocophis, some rhino rats,
Nice.
Angolan pythons, which don't get that big, and rough scale boas, and Paracameliolus and some night lizards. So a few
Nice.
things outside of geckos, but mostly
Nice.
geckos.
That's cool. So we are here today. We're talking like kind of doing like a compare and contrast with uh, Leaftails from Madagascar and then the Aussie Leaftails. Kind of help people make an educated decision on which would better suit them. Right?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I would start with on both of them as a whole, they're really an intermediate level species.
Yeah.
So stuff I recommend to people when they're starting off is primarily leopard geckos, crested geckos, like that. So anybody that's listening that's new, you might want to get a couple of years experience before you go into them. First and foremost is the animal's well-being. And Europlatus can be pretty sensitive, and some are more sensitive than others. The Aussie leaftails are pretty tough, but somebody new in this probably doesn't want to be spending that kind of money because it's kind of baller. Um, and in order to successfully breed them year to year to year, most of them you've got to either get into the 40s or 50s. So you're talking about a very real hard cool. Pylorus, well, Salturius wyberba, I cool them at about 42 to 43 degrees in a wine
Mhm.
chiller for 3 months, sometimes longer. So
That's
that's
crazy.
yeah, it's a crazy cool to deal with. So that's why I'm saying like if they want to breed them, I would definitely hold off and do
And
other stuff. But for people that want to go after that, I would say for Europlatus, some of the tougher ones would be like Ebanawi is a pretty good one. If they're captive bred, Sicare is pretty good. I would tend to avoid wild caught Sicare just because their breeding life is super short. And if you're getting an
okay.
adult, you have no idea if it's done or not. If you
Right.
just want it as a pet, that's fine. Um, but the temperatures play a pretty big role too because
Okay.
most of them like it cooler. I'd say the exception is Ebanawi with Europlatus and Phylurus caudianulatus with the Australian leaftails because Ebanawi is from deciduous forests that are like low to midland. So
Hmm.
it can actually get up to 85, 86 degrees in their environment. In captivity, you really want to keep them high 70s. it can get into the low 80s, and they don't need much of a cool. Because in the old days, everybody just said, "You're a platus, keep them cold, keep them in the
Right.
60s." And most of them, I would say, like mid to low 60s to mid 70s. Like for mid 70s daytime, mid 60s maybe nighttime drop. Um, but like Ebanawi, I let them go 79, 80 day, and it only drops maybe 5 degrees at night down to about 75. Great.
Okay.
Um, and like Madagascar, I guess we'll start off with the Europlatus because people are usually more
Oh
familiar with
yeah,
them.
definitely.
Madagascar is an island that, if you can visualize about midway through New York to midway to Florida, that's about how long that island is, a little over 500 miles. And it's shaped basically like a long oval. So
Yeah.
at the top, you have forests that are not cool. They're warm, but they're not like super warm. As you go down the west coast, because there's mountains that divide it down the middle, the west coast has cold winds and rains coming in from the ocean, and the east coast of it is more warm. When you get a little further down, about 2/3 down, there's desert. A lot of people don't know there's some desert habitat there. And then when you get to the bottom, there's some actually pretty hot habitat that's rocky. So the species that live there come from a much bigger variety of habitats than a lot of people usually assume. So I think it's important to look into the exact habitat for the species you want to work. Yeah.
Okay.
The Aussie ones, habitat wise, mostly high elevation and pretty cool temps. Most live on different types of rocks, some trees. The Cardianulatus are a little more lowland, but like all of the Aussie leaftails, when you looked at their distribution on a map, it's like a dot. Like a
Really?
lot of them, one
Okay.
natural environment disaster could wipe that species. It'd be done that fast.
Okay. I didn't even know that.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, so they're from very, very tiny habitats. But
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
So I would say maybe because I remember I was hearing you on a podcast before, and you were saying like was it like the fimbriatus? They need like cold water to kind of like
they
get
do.
them going. And
Yeah.
so, what is that all about?
Well, they're on the west coast where those cold winds kind of come in, and they're a tropical
Okay.
species. But really, to stimulate breeding on them, you don't want like freezing cold water, but I would say probably like in the 60s, maybe high
Okay.
50s, because those waters that come in come pretty cold.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of the breeding season with them, you want to spray them super heavy because they're used to that cold water just
Okay.
raining them constantly.
Okay.
The other thing to know about Fimbriatus, and it's pretty important, is almost all females will ovulate. That's not a problem. Not every male will breed with every female. So if I was going to do with Fimbriatus again, I would probably get 2 or 3 females and I'd get at least 5 males
Mhm.
and rotate and just keep track and watch them until I could figure out what males are actually breeding and what males actually
Okay.
aren't. They're one of the more difficult ones to breed just because of that. Yeah,
Okay. I did hear that from one person that said he was still trying to figure them out, and I was asking like why. He just didn't have a real answer. Like I don't know why. They just don't want to breed. And I was
sure.
like,
Yeah,
yeah.
if you try and do them like a Henkelei or a Sakurai, they'll
Hmm.
survive, but they won't really produce.
Okay. Okay. So as far as like with breeding, right? Now, are you giving them like that crazy hard cool, or do they need like maybe a soft cool?
Those ones are a little bit more of a softer cool. I would say
Yeah.
like low 70s for like 6 weeks. They don't
Really?
really need a hard cool.
Yeah.
The only stuff that I work with, and I've worked with probably 140-ish species of geckos over the years. The only things that I really hard cool are like Nephurus, the knobtail geckos,
Hmm.
and the Aussie leaftail geckos. Some of the Australian velvet geckos, not all. A
Hmm.
few of the Diplodactylus and Leucacium, but not all. And I don't really ever hard cool any of my Strophurus. I kind of soft cool them. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. You also said like even in soft cool, it's still a little dangerous just because you have to watch them a little bit more, right?
Oh yeah,
Just
yeah, yeah,
just because, like I said, they're getting some heat, not a whole lot, and like the timing is a little bit like shorter, so they might not have enough
mhm.
time to digest their food, and then just kind of just stays in their
Yeah. It
stomach, right?
species dependent. Some of them I actually wouldn't feed at all if they get down into the 60s. Some of them I
Okay.
might. It really depends on their distribution. Because like if you look at Australia on a map, the top is tropical and warm, and this is just rudimentary. It's not going through
Yeah.
all the tiny habitats, but the top is kind of tropical and warm in the Northern
Hmm.
Territory. The middle is mostly desert and hot. But when you get to the bottom, a lot of people don't know it actually gets pretty cool there.
Hmm.
There's some species of snakes that go live bearing, and that's a good indication if you have anything live bearing that it's cold and those eggs won't hatch if they incubate naturally. So it has to be in a reptile that's seeking heat to make
Okay.
those eggs develop inside of it. But like
Okay. Nice.
Underwoodosaurus millie, a lot of people will try and keep them like an amii or a wheeleri or a cinctus, and they're really more cooler, deciduous desert edge species. I
Hmm.
keep mine on a tropical soil, and I let the hot side stay dry, and I keep the cool side moist.
Okay.
And I've varied it. I've done half sand, half tropical, or all tropical. Same with like Nephrurus asper that's from far north. Because if you look at the natural history picks, it's in deciduous type areas and other types of
Yeah.
forests. It's not out in the desert like an amia.
Yeah.
So it's kind of similar to what we were talking about with the Euryplatus. A lot of people in the hobby, when they're new, they'll see a genus of something and say, okay, I know it from a desert. So all of them get a desert habitat, and it's not the case. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of people's thinking is they think Australia, they think arid instead
Yep.
of but you got to you like you said, leaf tails are more deciduous forest. You gotta keep them much cooler.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah.
so what is so for your playlist and or for both of them, right? What is the gestation period for most for commonly for the
Pretty pretty comparable on it almost goes by size. I'd say all of the Aussie leaf tails um 60, 70 days the way I keep them. And the temps they're kept will predicate a little bit of that. But I would say 60, 70 days. With
Mhm.
some of the smaller ones like Ebanawi, I probably get a clutch about every 3 weeks. With some of the
Wow.
other ones, I
Yeah.
would say every 30 to 40 days, the larger ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wasn't lying. They really fire them things out. Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
they do. Yeah, Ebanawi
That's
machine
crazy.
gun eggs. They're
Yeah.
probably the most prolific Euryplatus I've ever worked with.
Oh
Yeah, I
wow.
actually used to work with Fantasticus more. But the
Hmm.
thing about Fantasticus, when you're a breeder and you're shipping all over the country, some places are drier, some places are moister, some places are
Me.
warmer. Right, Arizona,
Yeah.
yeah. And they tend to be more sensitive than Ebanawi because Ebanawi are from that warmer environment and they
Hmm.
don't need it as humid. I just spray them heavy once a day. And once in a while, I'll even skip that if the enclosure still looks moist. I like to see a little bit of the soil kind of dry before I respray them.
Okay.
Um, but they're just more problem free. So that's why I actually moved over to them. Now,
Hmm.
aesthetically, people don't like them as much as the Fantasticus because they don't have the big leafy tail. But the thing
I
about Fants is they will sit there like a statue.
yeah.
And they are cool. If you feed them, they'll get around and move. But Ebanawi, I see active during the day, during the night.
Mm,
They're
yeah.
very frog-like in movement, which you'll see because you said I think you're gonna work on getting one.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Get
almost hop. And once in a while, if you startle them, they'll actually drop and faint being dead. They'll kind of do this on their back.
Is that
I'll
the
post a
picture that you have?
Yeah,
Is
it
that
is.
the
I'll repost it on Facebook later so people can see it doing that. But yeah, it's
yeah.
hilarious. They'll just do that, and as soon as they see nothing moving around them within a minute, they'll start moving around.
That is
Yeah.
hilarious. I was
Yep.
wondering how that like how you got that picture in there because
It's
there was
exactly
literally
it.
that's hilarious, man. So like you said, well, before that, I say with
Mhm.
Ebanawi, I don't understand. Like I like the spikes on them. because they have like
Hmm.
all these little spikes just coming out through the back and everything.
The
And
males. Yeah.
yeah, the males do, right? And
Yeah.
do the Fantasticus have that too, or is it just the Ebenawis that do that
It's
have that?
mostly on males more predominant, but you will see some on females, and it can be a little
Okay,
bit variable too.
yeah.
But
And
like on a
is
both of
that
those,
with all the Ebenawi complex, or just Ebenawis?
I wouldn't really say for sure because I've worked with Fiera, which is basically like an Ebanawi, but almost 3 times the size. And I've worked with Ebanawi, but there's some taxonomic splits going right now. It
Hmm.
wasn't that long ago that there was like 12 to 13 species of Europlatus. I believe it's a little over 20 now, and there's a bunch of taxonomic busts about to happen.
Okay.
So there'll be more. I think with a lot of those smaller ones that are geographically isolated in different patches, some
Hmm.
of them have been apart long enough to evolve genetically into a different species, and some of them have not. So I think it's going to be a lot of work trying to figure out what's what in that.
Gotcha.
Because
Okay.
they, of course, have to get samples of the animals or the actual animals, get them back and they work. Because most current gecko taxonomy isn't going by physical structure; it's going by the genetics, the
D
micro
the
DNA.
DNA. Okay.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
show you what that animal actually is. Yeah,
Okay. Is this
yeah,
what happened to the Oreador complex with Nebuliflora?
hmm yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, because like Amylosia got split out of it is a new genus. Nebulifera
Okay.
got split out as a monotypic new genus, and a bunch of them stayed in Uedura, but I'm sure there's going to be some splits from there too. So
Right. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
Strophaurus too. I believe the 3 subspecies of Taenacauda are supposed to be turning into full species. So
Really?
that'll be
Okay.
interesting one. Almost all of them in hobby are that red-eyed one, so it
Yeah.
shouldn't affect anybody that has them. But there's
Yeah. Because we're
also
not
a
getting any.
green-eyed form and a white-eyed form we used to see on occasion, but
Yeah.
I haven't seen those in a long time. I couldn't
Yeah.
guarantee they're not in the country anymore, but to the best of my knowledge, I haven't seen it in a long time.
Okay. So as for like the hatchings for the Eurypletus, right?
Mhm.
Is there? I mean, after they're hatched, is it a high success rate, or do you have to? Is there? Is it a low success rate? Like I
I
know. I
would.
mean, Chihuahuas are pretty
Oh, they're
good. They
tough.
don't pass. They're tough. Yeah. So how
Yeah,
tough are the Eurypletus when they're hatching or after they hatch?
it's it is completely species dependent on them.
Dependent. Okay.
I would say some of the tougher ones that I've dealt with are Hinkali, Fimbriatus, Fiera, Ebenawi, Lineatus are probably
Okay.
all your tougher ones. And Lineatus can deal with a little bit of warmth too, as opposed to other
Okay. Yeah.
It's not real warm, but they can
Not
tolerate
as
it for
not as
periods.
warm as like an Ebanawi, but almost close to it.
Yeah, close to it, but
Okay.
not quite there. And they're from
Yeah.
bamboo forests, which is why they're so striped.
They
They
look
kind
like
of blend
yeah.
in with that background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I figure because they probably get a little bit more sun on them since it's a bamboo forest. It's not
Oh
as
yeah.
bushy
Yeah.
as like the regular forest.
Well,
So they
and I
probably
think some good info that hits down with your question there as far as like sensitivity goes with them.
hmm
A big factor that can play into any of them is the females lay hard shelled calcified eggs that have a lot of calcium in it. So when they're pulling that calcium out of their body, a lot of them eat snails in the wild. And in their fecal matter, the shells won't be fully digested, but they will be digested some.
hmm
And I think in captivity, a lot of them don't get enough. So a few things you can do, and I only used to do this with the larger ones, but like Encoli, Fimbriatus, and Sakuri. There's also Giganteus, but I've never had a chance to work with them. I would make a liquid solution of calcium and water and give them oral doses on the females after every time they laid a clutch. And the other thing to know about them too that gets misconstrued a lot is UVB lighting for D3 and calcium absorption
hmm
versus the dietary stuff that we put on crickets and roaches and powder shake it. Um, if you're using UVB, you don't want to be using excessive amounts of calcium with D3 because it can activate a gonadotropin hormone and they'll lay, and you'll think, wow, they're doing great, but then they crash because all that
Okay.
calcium is just sucked out of their system. Um, so with those specifically, I like low grade UVB, like 3 to maybe at the absolute most 5%, and then
Okay.
calcium with no D3, except for about once or twice a month. I'll give it some D3.
Mhm.
Um, with a lot of reptiles, and this is just good to know for other geckos and species, if you're going to do the calcium with D3, you probably don't want to use UVB, and that's the species that primarily don't come out into the sun very often. And almost everything can seasonally because they pay more attention to their environment than us calling them nocturnal or diurnal or crepuscular. Um, but yeah, the D3 thing, I almost never pair that as a regular supplement with
Okay.
UVB. And for people that are new to Eurypletus, I would definitely say pay attention to the percentage you buy because that 3 to 5% is about perfect.
Yeah.
Most
Is
Eurypletus get retinal damage if they have too high of a UVB. So
okay.
if people get the kind that are really meant for like bearded dragons or Uromastyx, it will damage their vision and it'll be permanent damage. It won't repair because I've seen
Okay.
people give me their Eurypletus after they've done to it. They're like, blind, and
Shit.
I talk to them about it, and it's always the same thing when that happens.
Yeah. So would
Yeah,
you recommend like a Arcadia Shade Dweller for them?
I love Arcadia. Yeah,
Yeah.
Arcadia is great. The only ones that I really personally like are, and it's not to say that there aren't others that are good, but the only two that I like are Arcadia and I like Zoom It.
So I do
Because,
both of those as well. Yeah.
yeah,
Like
if you're using a
Chihuahuas.
UVB, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I want to say because like yeah, my Chihuahuas they get the Arcadia 6%,
Hmm.
or the Zoom Ed I think it's
Nice.
5.0.
Yeah.
Because like you because I was listening to you and you said that they put off a little bit of heat, which I've noticed that like so especially in the
Hmm.
wintertime when I'm pulling them down and
Yeah.
those that UVB comes on,
Hmm.
I'll see my like one set of my Chihuahuas like just hugging on them, just hugging on
Yep.
the fixture just to get a
They'll
little
dig
bit
it.
of warmth. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I also do. I have a what's the other one called? VivTech. So I do have a VivTech bulb
Sure.
as well, and
Sure.
I like it. It was not great for my Stropharis, just
Okay.
because it was just one little area and it didn't want to go to it at all.
Okay.
But when I put like the linear bulb, I got like a Zoom Ed 10.0 and put
Yeah.
it on there, and she actually just went straight to it.
Sure.
So it's great for my tropical stuff, but for
Yeah.
my area that needs a much higher one, it just
Yeah.
wasn't working.
I think some of the VivTech ones are good. The
Yeah.
only reason I really like the tubes is because I'm like with a 4 foot tube with geckos, I'm covering somewhere between 3 to 5 enclosures instead of one bulb per enclosure. And another good thing, I guess, to mention on UVB is I always put it to one side of the enclosure, and I always
Yeah.
make sure that the geckos have exposure to it, and just as important, exposure to get away from it, because most geckos don't just sit out in the sun all day.
Yeah.
A few that some people skip on is like Urodactyloides, the chameleon geckos,
Hmm.
and some people that I've talked to with Stropharis. And the thing is, depending on the species, a lot of them will have some shade, but it's not like a gecko that's hiding in a burrow. It's sitting out. There's times when they're exposed to that sun. So my general rule on UVB bulbs is if I study the animal's biology and it would be exposed to it, I utilize it. If it seems like it mostly would not, then I don't.
Oh.
And I don't think it's harmful to use UVB on any reptiles as long as they have the possibility of getting away from it when they want to. Because it's also antimicrobial, so it helps keep things clean.
Okay. Yeah. So so Anthony said he's not going to be able to make it because he can't get on. So,
Oh,
but
sure.
so actually, this I do want to talk about supplementation, right?
Oh, yeah.
So before you're getting them ready to breed and everything, what kind of subs are you using, and do you have any? do you use any kind of subs for emergencies as well?
I don't really have calcium emergencies, so I've never really had to do that just because I'm consistent and I like to buy stuff young and raise it myself. But I shotgun it because this stuff isn't really regulated by the USDA and
Yeah.
nobody's really inspecting it for the most part. So, like on the calciums, I've seen on rare occasion a batch that doesn't seem as consistent from one brand or another. So, to make sure that it's good, I use multiple brands.
Hmm.
Arcadia has a calcium brand that they came out with. Zoomed has one that's a fine powder and it really coats stuff well.
Hmm.
Repcal's decent. Those are primarily what I use. The Repashy Super Cal is pretty good too.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, those are primarily the supplements that I'll use. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I guess I should mention too, because they're eating inverts, most of them. Um, like what you put in those inverts is literally what you're putting in your animals. And I've
Yeah.
noticed a lot of people over the years, they try and feed their invertebrates what human nutrition is, like our balance of proteins, lipids
Okay.
from that, carbohydrates, fats, supplements, stuff like that. And these animals didn't evolve to our diet. I mean, actually, we didn't evolve to our diet from the things we eat.
Right.
But
Correct.
I mean, I know I like a good cheeseburger once in a while, but that wasn't
Yeah. I
on the
don't think
menu thousands of
McDonald's.
years ago.
Right. Yeah. McDonald's was not there back in.
Yeah, it might not, probably shouldn't be here today, but yeah,
Probably.
yeah. But yeah, as far as supplementation goes, the things I like to do for my inverts, like collard greens, mustard greens, turnip greens, kale, I will chop them up and I will soak them in cold water because it fills those cells with more hydration.
Okay.
Um, and I'll shake it off a little bit because you don't want to put wet stuff in there. But other things like carrots, sweet potatoes, peppers, cucumbers, chicken feed is a good thing to do. I know several people that do that. I would just go
Okay.
for the high calcium, lower protein content and not make it a portion of it, not all of it. I like to
Okay.
use, because I have Sri Lankan star tortoises,
Hmm.
I use the tortoise pellets that I feed them because a lot of inverts are eating high fiber things in the wild. And that stuff is perfect for that because it's not high
Okay.
protein, high fiber, has a good amount of nutrients. In the past, I've also used some no sugar breakfast cereals, and I
Okay.
always look
Like
for the ones that have like 20% to a third of your daily allotted balance for vitamins and
balance.
minerals,
Okay.
not the ones like total that have 100% or more, because then you're kind of over supplementing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, 'cause I know I do. What is it? I've started like lately. I've been starting like just chop up all my, like you said, fruits and veggies and stuff, and then
Sure.
I'll spray on just a little bit of just of like Pangea or something, just like the
Oh,
liquid.
sure. Yeah, that's good
Yeah,
stuff to use.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's the same thing the geckos are eating, so might as well give it to my bugs as well. And
Yep.
they clean it up and they eat all the food as well instead of just
Oh, yeah.
leaving some parts of it. They eat everything, so it's been
Oh, yeah.
working right now. So
Well, and with all of the species we're specifying in the talk today, too, hydration is super important with those. And
yeah.
that's another thing to look at with the food is that food item hydrated?
Hmm.
Because the three primary ways they get hydration is potable water, which they drink from spraying their bowls. The species, the leaf tails as a whole, spraying is better for that.
Hmm.
Um, the environment, because thinner skinned species, some of those, the environment affects their skin on if it's humid or not. And of course, lastly and most importantly, because we're talking about food and nutrition, those food items have to be hydrated. Like a litmus test for me is if I take a cricket and slightly bend the leg, you can see that it's hydrated. But if that bend is hard or it feels like it's going to break, that's not a hydrated cricket.
Hmm.
So if you can keep your crickets on point for hydration, any other thing you're doing the same way with hydration should be just fine. Like dubias, I keep a few colonies of those.
Okay.
I'll get hornworms. They're packed with nutrition and calcium. But those are primarily the things I use. I'm not a massive fan of mealworms. I think for some desert species, they are great. They're proven, they work. but
Hmm.
they have such a short gut inside of them that you can't gut load them much. And some
Okay.
species do really well with the chitinous shell on them, digesting it. Some tropical species don't do as well,
Yeah.
and they aren't an absolute necessity, so I just don't even use them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't really work well with my intermediates. Like
Yeah.
they literally poop those things out almost whole. Like
Right.
yeah, they'll eat like five of them, and then just next you know, I got this one log just full of mealworms. So
Yep.
I generally I don't feed them anymore. I was like I
Yeah.
keep super worms because my chihuahuas love them,
Sure.
and I just give them they get the Pangea diet, and then
Yeah.
whatever fruits and veggies I put in there as well. We
Yeah.
did get a question asking about do you use dandelions like the leaf and the flower for like your
Seasonally, I don't have them year round here, and it's a good question. Fortunately, the neighborhood that I'm in for now doesn't spray for
okay
insects. So that's something really important where you live to pay attention to, because
yeah.
if they're spraying those pesticides in the air, they're landing on your yard.
Oh yeah, they're floating around, and then they're gonna
Yep.
land on
Yep.
everything. Okay.
But fortunately, they don't here. So, like in the spring, in the very beginning of summer, when I get them, I will feed off both the leaves and the flowers to
Okay.
insects and my tortoises. Yeah.
Okay. Now,
But you
so
brought up a good point
yeah,
with your Chihuahua. Feeding off inverts with New Caledonian geckos. And I know it's off topic, on topic. I
that's fine.
think it's really important to feed them inverts and with some of them vertebrates, because some people in the powdered supplements are good. I do utilize them.
Mhm.
But some people want to do that for the only thing that they feed them. And I know this is controversial because the crested gecko crowd is never dramatic. But and I have friends in that crowd, so I'm messing with
Oh yeah,
them.
trust me.
And
Like
anybody else who wants to get mad at me, feel free.
yeah. Well, I mean, my co-host, he's a crested gecko guy as well. Well,
Sure,
he's a new cow guy, so he got
sure.
cresties, lychees, and chihuahuas.
Yeah,
So
I love leeches.
understand.
Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those things where, like, imagine feeding a species that primarily does eat other lizards and insects in the wild. Now make it eat a milkshake for its entire life.
Yeah.
You can look at pictures of wild ones and look at pictures of captive ones that have done just fruit mix. Look at their jowls. The muscles have atrophied some.
Hmm.
They need to chase things down. They need to
Yeah.
eat harder items, crunchy stuff. And the some of the supplements are great. I love the Pangea fig and insect. The breeder formula is pretty good too in
Yeah.
doses. And I'll add, and it's probably not necessary, but I always add extra calcium with no D3, because
Hmm.
vitamins A, D, E, and K are all fat soluble.
Yeah.
So if something has too much of it over a massive amount of time, it can build up to toxic levels in its system. But it's got to be a lot of it for a very long
Yeah.
time. It doesn't happen quickly. But by just using the calcium without the D3, the majority of the excess is excreted, and there's nothing really toxic building up. And I'm knowing that they get enough of it.
Right. Yeah.
Something else I've done, and I do probably 2 out of every 3 fruit feeds, is I'll use a blender and I'll pre-freeze some hornworms and some crickets, sometimes some dubium, and I'll put
Yeah.
them in there frozen and already killed, and blend that in for just extra protein. So I know that everything, because I'm feeding a lot of stuff, is getting it. Now,
Right.
all of the small to mid-sized ones, they all get invertebrates, like 2 to 3 times a week, and fruit mix once a week. With the larger ones, like the lychees, primarily I'll use fuzzies. And for ones that are new for people that aren't used to eating them, you can take some of the powder mix that you've been feeding and kind of lightly dust your fuzzies with that to feed them. When the lychees are smaller, they'll eat inverts. When they get bigger, I give them vertebrates.
Okay.
After they're eating it, and they'll reliably do it, then instead of the powder formula, I actually add calcium, and I'll like lightly spray them and lightly put it on them, and then
Mhm.
feed them off like that. So they're
Okay.
getting that extra calcium and that protein push. And I do vertebrates for the lychees anywhere from 3 to 4 times a month. and they do get fruit mix with extra protein added twice a week. So
That's good. Yeah,
yeah, the
yeah. I said I
temperatures.
definitely think. Or go ahead.
Mhm. Oh no, go ahead because you're probably on the same topic,
Oh,
and then
well,
I'll
I
hit
was
the
gonna
next
say
one.
because like with Cresties, right? Because I've
Mhm.
been noticing a lot of obese Cresties, right?
That's what
And
I was gonna hit. Yeah,
yeah, they're really obese. I didn't recently. I've gotten some Cresties maybe last year in a trade.
yeah,
I was supposed to get some Samboas. Litter never dropped. He's like, "Hey, do you want some Dalmatians?" It's like, "Yeah, sure, no problem."
sure,
Since I've had them, they've been on like my Chihuahua schedule with feeding.
sure.
So I feed my Chihuahuas bugs 3 times a week and diet once or twice a week.
Nice.
And the way I've seen them attack bugs, they are so like with ferocity. Like I see
Oh
them
yeah.
go at it like a toke, like just
Yep.
wow,
The
wow.
wolf.
I'm like, so why are people not doing this? Like
Right.
they love it. So why are we not feeding them those bugs like they should be feeding them?
Sure.
It's, I just never
I
understood that.
I think it's the old school, like 25 to 28 years ago when they were coming in. More like
Hmm.
28 to 30 years ago when they were coming in, because I had my first Cresteds about 25 years ago.
Yeah,
The issue with it is a lot of people in the very beginning, and a lot of them didn't know better. Some of them
yeah,
I think might have. They were saying room temperature, and they will survive it because they're really tough. But here's the take home for anybody that's into New Caledonians or species that they're told or really need it cool outside of high elevation or New Zealand is New Caledonia in the winter, it can get in the high 50s, low 60s. New Caledonia in the summer can get in the 90s, and in sometimes it'll breach 100. Those
exactly.
animals are just so tough that they've tolerated it for years. Now, here's the difference. 25 years ago, when I bought crested geckos, if you dump invertebrates in with them, they were like any other invertebrate eating gecko. Bam. I mean, they were on it
Yep.
like that, and they would eat it.
Yes.
The ones I've seen from some people's collections now that are frankly obese, they'll kind of flop towards it and they'll get
Hmm.
it. And I'm not saying this about everybody's, but I've seen some that are so obese that they seem to have a hard time hunting and they're not as pinpoint. And I think that's
Yeah.
generation after generation after generation
Yeah.
of keeping them too cool because they're so tough that they can survive it and not cycling them properly like every other reptile and amphibian.
Yeah.
I think it degrades the quality of the animal each generation that successively goes on. Um, so, I mean, if you get on my page and look at my animals, mine aren't thin and they aren't super thick. And if you look at pictures of wild ones in books in the internet, they're comparable to mine. And this whole thing about like Leachianus, the splatter all over the glass, they aren't getting enough protein and they aren't getting enough fiber. They're getting too much sugar in their diet. If you give
Yeah.
them enough, you'll still have some fecal matter that's a little softer, but it's not going to be splatter all over the glasses like some of
Yeah.
the pics I've seen come across my feed on Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Because I was
Yeah,
like my new cow stuff. They when they poop, it's solid. It's not
yeah,
runny. It's not liquidy. Because like I
yep,
said, they only get diet maybe 1 or 2 times a week, and they get
yeah,
bugs like three times a week. You know?
yeah. And you see
And
a little bit of white urates with it, which is the calcium.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, like
yeah,
any other
yeah,
reptile. Yeah,
exactly.
they're just so tough that they can tolerate it, but it doesn't
Yeah,
mean that they're good for them. That's
yeah,
kind of, I have very few things that annoy me. I'm a pretty patient guy. But when I hear people calling a gecko chonky and I look at it and that thing just looks awful, I
yeah.
know that they don't realize that they've abused that animal. And I'm
It's
not
just
mad
slow
at them
death.
for it, but they need to figure it out if they want to keep animals and start keeping it right. Because it's like if you see a dog that should weigh 50 pounds and it's 90, that's the same thing I'm looking at. I mean, not
Yeah,
exactly, but comparable.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, yeah. Welcome to my TED
So
Talk. So,
yeah,
yeah,
so for your plate is for the babies, right? What's the best way to house them? I've seen multiple different ways. I've seen people use like 32-ounce deli cups, 8 by 8 by 12s. What is your preferred method for that?
it's pretty species dependent. And this is another thing that I look at from perspective because the size of the baby to the size of the enclosure is kind of what's important for me.
Yeah.
Like with Ebanawi, because they're super tiny. The egg is like a little smaller than a pea. Same with
Mhm.
Fantasticus. I use fruit fly cups that have the metal screen lids that you can buy. I think it's either from Superior or TSK. I ordered 500 of them like 3 years ago, but it's one of those two. I know it came because it's enough to let UVB through it,
Mhm.
unlike the filtered lids.
Yeah.
And the size of the gecko compared to it is like putting a crested gecko in a 20-gallon tank. It's appropriate to it because if you give a teeny tiny baby gecko a large enclosure, it's going to be more difficult for it to get the food. It's going to be more difficult for it to just survive, period. And you're going to have to look through it every time you want to check on it. What I'll do is I'll put a few sticks in it of varying lengths because it's good to have different thicknesses for their grip as they're developing. And I'll
Mhm.
also put a flat piece of cork with a couple of
Okay.
tiny sticks below it. And I hate plastic plants, but I'll utilize one or two leaves. And the reason I set it up that way is they have multiple surfaces to get on. They can get out of the UVB under it or be in it if they want it on that low percentage. It's warmer at the top from it, but cooler towards the bottom. So they have a thermal zone. And
Mhm.
the reason I specifically use plastic plant leaves only with that, everything else I use live, is
Mhm.
because the water droplets will sit on that plastic longer than they
Okay.
will on a live plant. They'll kind of somewhat absorb in and dehydrate quicker.
Okay.
Um,
Smart.
yeah, but that's my setup for the teeny tiny ones. I would say mid-sized ones like Sikare. I like critter keepers. Um, and what I do is I take you can use a Ziploc bag. I use tropical fish bags
Yeah.
and kind of zip tie it to about 80% of the top of it. So it still has ventilation because you know critter keepers are shaped like
Yeah.
that on the sides,
Yeah.
and there's enough opening on one side to hang a low percentage UVB bulb over it, and then you can just do rows of them.
Okay.
For larger ones, when they're babies, like Hengeli, Fimbriata, stuff like that, I'd use XL critter keepers with the same exact setup. And my bump ups are usually Zoom eds in the 12 by 12 by 18s.
Okay.
Yeah. Or when they get bigger.
So, all right. Actually, I do want to kind of, well, so with the Aussie stuff, so how
Mhm.
many are actually represented in the U.S. or actually for both genuses? How many are actually represented in the U.S.
On the
species wise?
Aussies, we have Amnicola, rare but Caudy annulatus, Platurus, White Berba, Cilibrosis, Kete. I want to say there's about 9 species, 8 or 9 species of the Aussies, and they're less common. For Europlatus, I'm going to sling a guess on that one. And it'll be a decent one. I would probably say maybe a dozen, give or
Okay.
take a few, about a dozen species of those.
Okay.
Some are much less common. Alaudi just came in a few years ago, and
Yeah, I
people
saw
are
Justin
starting to
hatched them
breed
out.
those.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
Justin
really
hatched those
cool
out.
because
Yeah,
that's a new
definitely.
one for us. Well, not necessarily new. They've come and gone in the past, but they were very, very rare. And in the old
Yeah.
days, no one was successful with them. Um, and it's kind of crazy because, like you brought up enclosures, back in the day, we didn't have the European style zoom eds and like exoterras where they
Like
have
the
the
front
plastic
opening.
strip for
Oh,
ventilation
okay,
at the
with the
bottom
ventilation. Yeah.
and then the vent at the top. And that's how the European cages are usually made. And the
Okay.
reason for that is the natural thermal zone in a room is cooler towards the floor and warmer towards the ceiling. So there's a natural slight amount of airflow just from the temperature, even if there's nothing moving the air in it.
Okay.
And those animals live in very fresh environments, but they're also humid. And in a glass tank without that low ventilation strip, it's pretty hard to maintain that. Now, there were people successful with breeding those back then. There's just far more now because it's a better environment to do
Okay. Nice. So, for okay, so Now we're so for the microhabitats for the Aussies, right? So what kind of gradients are we looking for in those, so they can make sure they're setting them up correctly?
I would say it's pretty species dependent.
Hmm.
Like Ebanawi, I'm looking like high 70s day, like mid 70s night. Um, a lot of the other, you could kind of lump them a little bit, but not exactly. Like mid 70s, I'd say,
Yeah,
because babies tend to be more sensitive than adults, and
yeah,
they can tolerate the natural zone, but you're going to have more problems with them than not
yeah,
than if you stick in that middle area when they're young and then vary it more as they get bigger. That's really more for people that are new to it. Once you've been
yeah,
doing it a while, you can probably do more variation because you really know what you're watching.
yeah. What
You
about
know,
for
that's,
like the Aussie side, for the
yeah.
Aussie leaf tails? What about them?
The
Like,
Aussie
what would be good?
Leaftails, I would say, except for Caudianulatus, mid 70s is pretty good. You can
Yes.
get a nighttime drop. If it gets up in the high 70s during the day, it's not going to really kill anything. The only one in captivity that is pretty easy to kill with temps is Platurus, Phylorus
Okay.
Platurus.
Okay. Yeah.
And that one, if it gets up in the mid 80s, they might be toast. If it gets up in the
Okay.
90s for a low period of time, they're dead. And it'll kill their
Okay.
breeding season if they survive it until the next cool for the next year.
Okay.
Which also, with any of the Aussie leaf tails, if they drop a tail, especially if it's a male, you're
Yeah.
going to get no production until that tail is regrown because they use it to interlock with the females
Okay.
when they're locking up to breeding. And if they
Gotcha.
don't have
Okay.
it, it's really hard. I mean, they could probably do it if they really, really tried, but I've seen more failure than success without a tail. That
Okay.
happens. And they're not prone to do it, but they can.
So, how are you cooling down your Aussie geckos? Like, because you said they need a real
Sure.
good hard cool down. So, how are you doing yours?
Well, our last 3 or 4 winters, I used to have a room that I dropped the whole temp and I had like an air conditioner in it.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, our winters have been getting warmer and warmer and warmer. So I went with wine chillers because you can get them within the appropriate temp range. You
Hmm.
can keep good control of it. They hold a good humidity that's not too humid. And I basically just put them in critter keepers and make sure they have enough room that they can move a little up and down and around in it.
Okay.
And it's kind of crazy because like some of them, specifically Phylorus platurus, they've been observed in the wild down in the 40s in the winter,
Yeah. Yeah.
still hunting and
Yes.
eating. That is
So my
wild
buddy,
for a reptile.
yeah, my buddy showed me. So my friend Stephen Kerbo,
Hmm.
he literally showed me a picture. He
Hmm.
temped his enclosure. It's at 43 degrees, and that
Hmm.
thing was still out and about roaming around. He fed it. I was like, dude, that
Yeah,
just gives me anxiety just thinking about that.
yeah, Steve. That was Amnicola, right?
Yes.
Phylorus Amnicola. Yeah, you got him for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. He's in
Yeah.
Oklahoma. I know him. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely a good guy. We had him on the show like when we first started. Yeah. We
Oh,
actually talked
nice.
about we talked about a bunch of stuff.
Cool.
But yeah, definitely he's a good guy. We did get a question.
Yeah.
My friend Matt asked, "Is there a better species of Aussie leaves for someone who has never kept them?" Which I kind of think I know the answer to this one, but go ahead,
Yep.
Joe.
Yep.
I'm
And you do.
sure.
It's Phylorus amnicola.
Yes.
They're the most reasonably priced. They're the toughest as far as temperatures go. And I mean, they honestly, one of the reasons they're the most reasonably priced by a lot, they'll breed almost like a crested gecko, but without the fruit mix.
Yeah.
They're crazy easy to breed. Even if you
Yeah.
screw up the cooling a little, they still have to get cooled some, but a
Hmm.
lot of them, like Wyberba, it has to be perfect to get them
Yeah.
to breed more than one season.
Can you
But
tell that
like he's
story that
just
you had about those Nicola? Because I remember I heard it. I think it was on Lizard Brain Radio about your
Mhm.
Nicolas that you got before. Can you go ahead and tell that story real quick on
Yeah, what was it?
how many eggs they laid? Like that one female.
Well, it's varying depending on the female, but I remember the
Yeah.
first season, I think I got maybe 7, 8 clutches. It was something like that. I know it was a lot. It was a while
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, I think
But they
what was it?
do.
He said like I think you said like after like the fifth or sixth clutch, you took the male out, and she dropped like, I think you said like 5 or 6
Hmm.
more clutches. I was
Yeah,
like, when I
and
heard
I'll
that, I
do
was like,
that.
good lord.
I'll do that before the end of the breeding season. There's a Phylloris amnicola,
Yeah,
the one
beautiful.
that we're talking about right now. Yeah, with the trying to figure it out with the camera there.
You're good right there.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But yeah, they live on granite outcrops, so that's what that pattern is.
Yeah.
So that matches that pretty well. But yeah, they're definitely the easiest one to keep. And if somebody wants to start off with them, I'd recommend that.
Hmm.
Prices vary season to season. I've seen babies as cheap as 350. I've seen them as high as 450. Sexed
Yeah.
pairs are usually about a K to 1200 for juvies. Um, and then here's one that I really wouldn't recommend to the general public, only for the cooling if they want to breed it. Keeping them alive is easy, but you've got to get down into the like 40s. The first season they could breed without any cool, and that's almost all geckos. I wouldn't recommend it, but they can. Now, seasons after that, this is Salturius wyberba, the grumpy one. And whoop, whoop. Hey, buddy. I know, I know. I'm gonna have to hold him to get him to stay still. But let's see if you can see the mouth. It's blue
Oh
inside.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which one is that?
This is wyberba,
Oh, okay.
and wyberba. I'm gonna put you down in just a second, buddy, because I don't want to stress you.
I can hear that.
Yeah. But yeah, wyberba. You really got to get them down into the 40s for almost 3 months. So that's why I use a wine chiller with them.
Yeah.
And I've had a few customers that are like, "Well, I don't want to spend like $200-300 on a wine chiller," and I'm like, "It's a
You get one for
thirty-five hundred
$50.
dollar pair of geckos. If you want to breed them, I mean, the financial aspect isn't the most important, but if breeding them is important to you and you're going to spend that much money with me on them, you might want to be able to at least recoup your money and just
Yeah.
spend $300 on a wine chiller on Amazon and
Yeah. I
just
mean, or
cool
go
them
to
right.
Facebook Marketplace and go find one.
That's true.
Something.
That's
Yeah,
true.
they all the
Yeah.
time for like $50.
Yeah. Plus, it's a little
Yeah.
healthier for them, even if you aren't going to breed them to cycle them.
Yeah. So we did get a question. I guess so. Matt's asking, I'm guessing what cage size do you use for your breeders? And then
Sure.
do you co-have them year round, or are you separating?
I separate them, and I have a lot of extra caging. I'm a big fan of separating a lot of stuff if it's not a species that naturally lives together, like viper geckos or Benaway's gecko, heteronocha. Those are
Hmm.
found in groups under things in the wild naturally. And
Yeah.
like with the viper geckos, the males won't bother each other. They're fine, whereas most geckos don't deal with that.
Hmm.
My general rule is if it's terrestrial, because arboreal stuff can kind of get away a little bit, I'll usually single house it and rotate males. It's not necessary. The females just seem to be less stressed and hold better weight, so I prefer it.
Okay.
With the arboreal stuff, it's very species dependent on how they get along, and if I'll co-have them or separate them and rotate for breeding.
Okay.
But take like lychees, for example, they kind of bond some, so it's almost
Yeah.
better if they get along to leave them together and never
Yeah.
separate.
Yeah.
Especially the
Same with my
GGs like
chihuahuas.
Mayates.
Yeah.
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 But
I just
to
can't get
answer
it.
his question, the cage size, I'm good at sidetracking myself. I would say breeding pairs of those, like 18 by 18 by 18 or 18 by 18 by 24. If you just want to keep one as a pet, 12 by 12 by 18, just make sure it has one of those backgrounds it can climb. And I like for the arboreal stuff like those that have claws, I like to take like a piece of cork and another piece of cork and kind of wedge them together like that because it's not heavy like stone, so you're not going to crush them if something gets over wedged,
Hmm.
but they have places they can feel secure. They can
Okay.
wedge
Yeah.
themselves into it if they really want to get away. And I'm
Yeah.
big on if you're going to have multiple animals in an enclosure, multiple hides, places they can
Visual
get away from
barriers.
each other so they
Yeah.
don't feel that pressure of having to be together, and visual
Yeah.
barriers as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Because you got to think about most of these animals in the wild, they don't live together. in the wild. Like viper
Mhm.
geckos and heteronocha are a little bit of an exception.
Mm.
Most of them don't. They breed and get away from each other and want nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
So
Now, for most of your setups, are you doing, I guess, the bioactive stuff, or you kind of
Mhm.
keep it?
It's species dependent.
Yeah.
Some of them, like the Aussie leaftails, I do, and they don't
Okay.
really seem to like a nest box anyway.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
will go with about 3 inches of soil, and then there's of course, the clay balls below it with
Yeah. Drainage
plastic
layer and all that
free,
stuff.
but
Yeah.
bioactive because it keeps them more aerated and fresh for the eggs.
Hmm.
And what I do, and this is for all of my geckos, is I use painter's tape and I'll put it on the enclosure because painter's tape, of course, comes off and on really easily. And
Yeah.
I'll use a Sharpie for records. And one of the things I do is every single time, well, the first time I pair them, I'll write that down. And then every time I get a clutch, I write that down because I have so many enclosures with so many geckos. When I
Yeah.
look at it, it kind of tells me the next time I can expect a clutch. And I'll start looking about 4 or 5 days before I know it's going to be laid in case it's
Okay.
early. And somewhere between that to a little after, I'll find it. But I don't have to look through lots of stuff all the time doing that. Um, painter's tape is a pretty good way to keep records, and records are
Yeah.
important too. Like I can tell you the difference between when I worked at the zoo to when I run this solo by myself. A lot of people, I think, spend a lot of time on records they don't necessarily need. And if they enjoy doing that, it's not hurting anything. More power to you. But like weighing your animals all the time, use a sprayer that's hooked up to a pump. So when I go through with my wand, I prefer that over a misting system because it keeps my eye on every single enclosure on a daily to bi daily basis.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm looking at my animals. And if you're familiar with your animals and you know that species, you should know what it's going to look like. If it's getting thin, you see it. And the difference
Hmm.
between a 1 to 3 gram difference could be the difference between full and just defecated. So to me, weighing them all the time, unless there is a problem with the animal, which I would do, I don't weigh geckos just to write it on a piece of paper. It's not helpful. Now, in a zoo, you may go on vacation, you may have your 2 days off, somebody will be watching your part of the building. You might quit or find another job. And in that case, the people coming in behind you need those records to understand what's happening. But as a
Yeah.
solo that's running it by myself, the only things I really keep records on is if an animal needs veterinarian care, I permanently keep a record with it inside of a Ziploc attached to it. And
Yeah.
then I pay a little bit of closer attention to whatever the issue was. And it's rare, but when you have 3 climate controlled rooms full of geckos, you
Right.
are going to have to take things to the vet here and there. It's important.
Hmm.
And that brings up another good point. Anybody that keeps reptiles, not every reptile vet is as good as the next one, just like any job. Not all teachers are going to be as good as all teachers. Not all people in the medical field are going to be as good as all. So
Yeah.
find yourself a reptile vet right now that you
Yep.
know is qualified and good at it. Because there's some people that have training or have done it over the years and they're fantastic. There's some people that do mammals and they've read a couple of books and they don't do it regularly. And sometimes they'll get it, sometimes they'll miss things. Um, so make sure you have a qualified vet and be ready for it because if you're going to keep a number of animals over an extended period of time, sooner or later you are going to need veterinarian care for some animals. And
Yeah.
if you do it as a business and you have a tax ID, save all of your receipts, every single one, because it's a partial deduction here. It helps you kind of combat that higher vet bill, because I have a regular one that I can use. Unfortunately, she's about to move on to another business. And I
Ouch.
just found out it's not here in St. Louis, Missouri. So I'm going to have to find another local vet. I've got a friend that's awesome in Chicago, but that's 5 hours away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I
yeah, but
remember telling folks or some podcasts ago,
mhm,
tell them to go to that arab.org, the
yeah,
arav.org, and just type in your zip code and it will pop up everybody that's close to you that still specializes continue study with reptiles.
yep,
So
yep.
it's just a good resource to have.
It is. It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that you see on the internet, man. I know you've seen it too. People get in groups and they start asking for medical advice on animals, and
Yeah.
they are shotting that question out into the void.
Yeah.
It could go anywhere from somebody that's highly qualified that's answering to somebody that knows nothing of what they're talking about and just wants to answer.
Yeah.
And it can be as detrimental as it can be helpful. So if you don't know the answer to your question on the internet, my advice is seek qualified experts to get your advice from, because
Yes.
it's like the YouTube videos from people that some of their stuff is informative. Some of their stuff, they just got the animal and they've had it a week and they're trying to tell you how to take care of it based off what they were told, but they
Yeah.
haven't proven it. And that's kind of my litmus test on if I'm going to trust a breeder. Sometimes I will ask them questions that are obscure that I know the answers to see
Hmm.
if they will answer it, not know it, BS me, or just say, hey, man, it's something I haven't done, which I will do if I haven't. I honestly don't know the answer, but I know this person and this person specializes in it. So let me send
Exactly.
you
Right
their way,
there.
and they might be able to help you out.
Yeah. That I mean, 9 times out of 10, that's what I do right there. But like, I don't know this
Yeah.
answer, but I know someone that probably does know the answer, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'll share his link with you. You go ahead and reach out to that person,
Oh
and
yeah.
hopefully you get that answer.
Oh yeah.
No,
It's a big
every
thing to
now and
do
then,
with
like,
reptile shows too. I always tell new people, if you're buying an animal from somebody, even if you know what to do with it, ask them for two reasons. One, you're going to find out if that animal was being taken care of right or not. If they don't know what they're doing with it, um, and two, I mean, it kind of lets you know if you should be buying from them or not. There's a lot of
yeah,
qualified people, but we've all been to reptile shows. There's also people that will just sell anything, uh,
yeah,
and they can't tell you how to take care of it. If somebody can't tell me
yeah,
how to take care of something they're trying to sell me, I ask them, is there somebody that you work with that can? And if they can't find somebody that can help me, I don't buy
okay,
it.
yeah. And I'll also do is I have a lot of stuff saved on like my Google Share Drive, a lot of care kit or know, books and all kinds of stuff like that. Especially like
Sure.
I have that like that Danny Brown geckos and pygopods. So if
Oh
someone reaches
yeah,
out and asks me
that's a
about
great book.
Stropharis or anything, I
Yeah.
send them that. I will send them that book. Like, go ahead and read that. That'll get you
Yep.
a lot of information that you will need. I mean,
For
there
sure.
is some questions that you might still have. Like, I remember I asked you, I was like, hey, because they were saying doing like I, I'm guessing he was talking like snout to vent size for enclosure,
Mhm.
and like so it has to be at least 4 snout to vent sizes. And it was throwing
Yeah.
me off. And I asked you, and you're like, just do this. It's like, all right, cool, no problem, got it now.
Yeah.
You know? And
Yeah.
then, like I said, I talked to you, and whenever you give me information, I literally put that on my notes, print it out, put it in a notebook. So I got
That's
like a
organized. That's good.
yeah,
Yeah.
like for anything that I have any interest in, I put it in this big old binder notebook that I have.
Sure.
And so, like, I literally just started printing out for the Capote's Dumbara,
Yeah.
because I'm interested in those. Because I want something that's a live bearer. Like,
Nice.
I'm so dedicated to get something that's live bearing. Besides,
Yeah.
no, no, I have my
Yeah. I've
kids,
done
but I need
trackies.
something
They're
else.
pretty cool. You will
Yeah.
never see them. You will
Hmm.
never ever see them. Once in a while, you might see them out basking, but when you get close, they are
Yeah.
they are hidden. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually recommend the lessers over the graders, even though the
Hmm.
graders are kind of more wanted,
Yeah.
because you can get lessers for like 1,000 a baby or graders for like 3 to 5K a baby.
Yeah.
They're all over the place.
Yeah. I think I've seen someone with the lessers for like a pair for like 42.
Yeah, for a sex
Yeah.
pair, that's pretty good. But
Yeah.
the thing is, it's like the graders are only slightly bigger and they're more likely to eat their babies than the lessers. And if you're only going to get a pair of babies every year or two, man, that
Yeah.
really sucks to
Yeah.
go
You
in and
can't have
see that
that.
tail hanging out of the mouth. Yeah. So I recommend the lessers. They're both cool species,
Yeah.
subspecies. But yeah.
Definitely. So for incubating both genuses, right?
Mhm.
Are you actually putting them in an incubator, or do you just let them kind of room temp, and like what incubation
Sure.
medium method do you like to use for them?
Um, for That's a really good question to answer for people too. I use room temps in different rooms for different temps for different reasons.
Mhm.
Because like with the Ebanawi, when you get up in that 80 plus degree range, you're producing all males. Around 75 below, you're producing almost all females. And in that 76 to 77, you're kind of getting both. So I keep min-max thermometers in all of my rooms that show me the highs and lows daily. And I look at them every day. So I know the average areas and high lows areas in my rooms for the appropriate places to put the egg boxes. Now, I use incubators for some stuff, but I would say 85% of the eggs that I hatch don't go in an incubator.
Uh-huh.
It's really got to be something that needs precise temps with a thermometer on it or
Okay.
higher temps than my rooms can provide.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, the egg boxes, that's the really good question. With the Aussie leaf tails, they're all soft shell eggs. So
Okay.
they, like any New Caledonian gecko, they go in a moist incubation. You could use clay, you could use Sims, like the incubation clay,
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
vermiculite, perlite. As long as it's appropriately set up with water, you're good. You're good to go. I
Mhm.
like the incubation clay personally, because the stuff that you see marketed in the pet trade in a little bag for $20, you can get
You
a
can get
40-pound bag of it.
yeah.
It's called shoot. I'll get the name of it and drop it in the comments. I'll go
Okay.
downstairs later and get it off the bag. The
Yeah.
last time I bought them,
I'll
I
put in
bought
the show notes too.
okay, I bought 2 bags about 4 or 5 years ago, but it's basically just an incubation clay. It's
Okay.
made to dry mounds for baseball. That's its original purpose. But this stuff is like 40, $50 for a giant bag of it.
Is it that turfus?
Turfus. Thank you. Yeah,
There you
it's
go.
turfus. Just the
Okay.
regular stuff, but it's cheap in the giant bags. And if you want to just toss it and use more, you can. You just get it moist and drain it. But if you want to keep it going, you can boil it and strain it and rinse it a couple times at the end of the season. And you
Yeah.
can use that stuff almost perpetually and never have to buy it again.
Okay.
The other thing that I like about it too is as it loses moisture, it starts to get a little bit lighter in color, unlike vermiculite and perlite, where you can't really see that.
Mhm.
So when that happens, you just know to add a little bit more water in the corner. I try and not add it by the eggs because if it's a soft shell egg, it can kind of over absorb water if it's too much. So I'd always rather go a little bit at a time than a bunch because you can drown the embryos. Now,
Okay.
that's the Aussie ones that are soft shell. Basically, a container like this, I'll tape over the holes a 6.75-inch deli cup, and I'll about half fill it with it. And I'll burp it for air like once a week for 5-10 seconds for, gas exchange. And the Europlatus, I use the same kind of containers, but what I do is I put the same setup, the incubation clay on the bottom, but then I use little 2-ounce plastic portion cups like you get sauces in from a restaurant with no lid,
Yeah.
and I'll put dry perlite in that because they
Mhm.
need humidity, but they don't want to be sitting in a wet substrate. So
Okay.
the eggs go in the dry perlite in the 2-ounce cup, and then the 2-ounce cup goes on top of the incubation clay. Lid shut, holes taped over, open once a week. Same. That way it has ambient humidity in the egg box, but they're sitting in something dry so the eggs won't rot. Most
Okay.
hard shell eggs want to be in a drier thing. There's some exceptions, but for the most part, hard shell eggs, I go dry. Um, Soft shell, I go moist.
Okay. All right. Hey, I'm doing my Who's wrong then. Shit.
Well, if
Because
they're
I have my
hatching, you're not.
oh, I mean, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, they are hatching because I have
sure,
mine in a like a little. I think it's like those little Pangea ones, and
sure.
I just put no. I think it's Pangea hatch, but then I also
Yeah,
put a little bit of spag in there just to
sure,
make sure it stays moist.
sure.
And I mean,
Well,
I'm I'm better than a 75% hatch rate right now.
oh yeah.
So
Well, your incubation on those is a little bit different too, and it's kind of
mhm,
cool because they're an evolutionary in between. When
mhm,
you cut that egg after the babies come out and look at a cross section, they aren't all the way a soft shell. Like, you know how thin a crested gecko or gargoyle egg is?
mhm,
They're thicker and more calciferous, which is why it's more important for Kahua to get more calcium.
Yeah.
everything should get it, but they should get extra. Um, because they're either going towards hard or towards soft. In their environment, I'm going to guess it just needs to be a little bit tougher. For the most part, they live near running water like streams, rivers, things like that. So maybe
Mhm.
that's to deal the thicker one with that extra moisture they get. So it doesn't
Yeah.
oversaturate it and overfill the egg.
Yeah.
But
And I'm starting to notice that they
yeah.
have two different egg, or like I only have two pairs, right? And
Hmm.
I'm seeing like just differences in how both their eggs are forming. Like I have
Yeah.
ones that they're almost round, and then I have ones that are pretty much like footballs, and they both are consistently doing that.
Okay.
I was like, is this? I didn't know if that was a thing or not, or do I have
I
a
don't
mainland in my
know.
collection or something? I
I
don't
mean,
know.
well, sometimes oddball things happen with biology. There's
Yeah,
that statistical probability that something weird can happen. I would say with Kahua, they're almost always kind of football shaped.
yeah,
Um, I've never seen a round one, but if they're hatching and they're healthy,
yeah.
there's probably nothing
I mean,
wrong.
it's not crazy round. It's just
Right,
they're a lot different from the other pair.
from the other one.
So
Is
yeah,
one maybe mainland and one maybe Pine Isle?
that I keep questioning that one too.
Yeah,
That's the question I
because
keep coming back to.
the Pine Isles will have the true ones will have slightly larger eggs,
Uh-huh.
and the mainlands will have not round, it'll still be oval, but shorter eggs, so they look a little more round.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah,
possible that that's the case.
yeah. And that's what I
I'm
was
not
thinking
sure.
when I first got them. I was like,
Yeah,
are these mainlands? Because when they got sold to me, they were PIs. So I was like, okay. And I
yeah,
trust the person that I bought them from.
sure,
He's pretty big in the hobby. So I was like, I don't want to question it because I don't really know either. So I
sure,
don't know.
sure.
But
Yeah, it's hard to say because sometimes animals will just throw oddball things, even if they are
yeah,
what they are. So you never really know.
yeah.
But that's
So
the lineage and buying from people that know the animals because locales there's I won't buy Leachianus locales from some random person at a show. It's like you said, you have to know not only that they have a name, but that they also have a good reputation.
right,
Because let's
yeah.
be honest, this is reptiles. Just because somebody has a name doesn't mean it's
Doesn't
going to
mean they have
back
a
the
good.
product. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. I've learned that the hard way when I bought my first pair of Ciliaris. Um,
yeah,
well, because the person I bought them from, he could give me one answer for where like the male came from, but he couldn't give me an answer on where the female came from.
sure.
And and then when they first got paired together, she was only firing off one egg. Like, so I was like, what's going on? Is she
That's
like
weird.
one of her ovaries messed up or something that you didn't
Yeah,
tell me about? So she only fired off two eggs once. And then every
yeah,
other time it was just one egg, one egg, one egg. And if it was a
yeah.
bad egg, she wouldn't even bury it. She would just drop it wherever.
Okay.
Yeah. But then she also got, what was it? I think she got egg bound and passed away. That's what happened.
Oh,
Because every time she was about to lay, she would look lethargic. And
something
so I
kind of
thought that was,
wonky.
yeah, so I thought that was part of her
Yeah,
process. So, but
yeah.
then the last one, she couldn't pass her egg, or she didn't pass the egg. So I was like, she got egg bound on that one. So,
Right.
but like I said, lesson has been learned from making sure, like when I ask these questions and I don't get the right answer, not to buy from that person. So,
Yeah, that's a good call. I don't.
it's a, yeah,
Yeah.
it's expensive lesson, but it's a lesson learned.
Yeah,
So,
if I sense anything shady for selling or buying, literally even selling, I've turned people down on selling to them. If I
yeah,
think they're going to kill something, and I don't want to offend them, I'm just not going to let the animal die over that. Because if somebody
yeah,
comes up to me, and I don't breed them anymore, but they want like Chinopus carpi,
mhm,
which could die if you sneeze in the next room,
yeah,
they're just not a hardy species. Or like a Europlatus fantasticus, I would not sell those to anybody that wanted to buy them. They had to be qualified. So if
yeah,
somebody comes up and they're like, "Hey, I saw these on the internet. They're really cool," and it's somebody that has money and they want to buy them, or somebody that's only kept a very basic animal and has never kept something, I'm like, you might want to get this or this first, whether if it's from somebody else in the room or me. Just get a little more experience, and when I know you're better at it, I'll sell it to you. Um,
yeah,
because I think
yeah,
some people get panicked and they just want that sale. What they don't realize is
yeah,
they still have the animal to sell. You can sell it a week, a month, 3 months from now, and you're still going to make the money from it.
yeah.
And you won't kill the animal doing it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. No, and one of my things too, like for selling wise, if someone tells me, I've literally had people tell me, like, I want to pair one of your Chihuahuas with a Cresty. I'm like, you're not getting it from me then. Like,
sure,
I don't do it. I don't like hybridization is not my thing. And
sure,
like, well, they do it in nature. Well, I'm not nature, so let
right,
nature handle that. Like, why do you
yeah,
want to do this? What is the point? What is like? Do you have a scientific background? What are you trying to study for this? Oh, I just want to make a
sure,
gecko. No, sorry, it's not happening. Like,
right,
I was,
right,
certain
yeah,
morals. That's one of them. I just won't. I won't do. So if they ask me, I'm
yeah.
like, no, it ain't
I
happening.
don't know if you've ever seen that in the dart frog community, but if somebody hybridizes something there,
Yeah, I heard
woo,
they
and I don't
lose their
blame them, but
crap.
man, they go ballistic.
Yeah, they lose their
Um,
stuff. Oh no.
yeah, yeah. I've
So
kept a few dart frogs over the years, and
yeah, I'm
they're
horrible with
cool.
amphibians, so I literally
Yeah.
stopped. Like my girl's
Oh,
trying
I
to get me
forgot
back
to
into.
mention that earlier when I was listing off the stuff that is not a gecko. I also have Solomon Island leaf frogs and
Oh, it's cool.
true tomato frogs and some salamanders and newts. So
Nice, nice.
yeah,
Yeah, I like salamanders. Those are cool. I'm
they
just
are.
horrible with amphibians. Like I don't know.
Yeah,
Like I killed a Pac-Man frog. I don't even know how. So I was
yeah.
like, you know what?
Well,
But
the
my girl's
number
trying to
one
get me
thing
to.
you obviously know what you're doing with animals, so the number one thing I'd look at is your water quality.
Mhm.
Because if amphibians are dying on you and they're clean captive bred animals, it's probably the water quality. It could be something
Yeah,
else, but it usually
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, I know when
It's
they
been a
redid,
long time since I
yeah,
had them. So
when they redid the water lines around here, it changed the water quality. I
yeah,
used to not need an RO system, and I
yeah.
had to buy one. And when my buddy Chris, that's a plumber, installed it, it shows like the amount of impurities in the water
Hmm.
before we had the filters in and after, and it
Yeah,
was like through the roof.
yeah, yeah.
Like I
I
noticed,
get RO water now. I just go to the
yeah,
water stations and fill all my. I get like probably like 5 gallons worth of water, and then because I put it in my
nice,
sprayers and put it in my
yeah, yeah,
humidifiers,
yeah,
just for the reptiles.
sure.
Yeah. What kind of sprayer do you use? I forgot to even ask you that.
Uh, I hate to say this, but it's kind of a top secret for right now. I have a, I'm not developing it.
Uh-huh.
Somebody that used to work at the same zoo
Hmm.
has a system that they're developing
Okay.
where basically something's permanently plugged in and you can just walk around spraying. You're not going to have to refill anything.
Okay.
You're not going to have to pump anything. There's no battery involved. But I mean, it's he's developing it, so I can't release it right now.
Okay. Gotcha.
He's moving very slowly because I've tested it for over a decade, and I'm like, dude, you need to get that to market. But it makes my life a lot easier because if I
Yeah.
use a pump sprayer, it would take
Yeah.
me probably about 50, 60 minutes to get through everything. With that
Yeah.
thing, I'm done in 15, 20 minutes. So
Damn.
it's high
Yeah.
output, so I have to walk quickly with it unless
Okay.
something really needs to get sprayed hard. But and it's
Okay.
a
Yeah.
fine mist, so it's not spraying hard
Nice.
in there. It's
Yeah.
just dropping that moisture in. Yeah.
Nice. That's perfect. Yeah.
Yep.
I've went through a couple different sprayers. Like, first it's the little real quick, and now I
Yeah.
got I've had the battery powered ones.
Hmm.
It was a cheap one. I got it off of like Amazon for like $30. Like
Sure.
it worked for like a year, and then after that, I just didn't want to spray
Yeah.
anymore. So that was done. And I keep
I'll
going
tell
through
you
those.
what's not bad. I had it was one of the Ryobi ones with the rechargeable battery. I
Yeah,
think
I
it
think that's
was
the
like
next one.
100 to $130 or something at Home Depot, but I
Yeah,
kept it as a backup. That way, if my system stops working and I need him to do any kind of electronic work on it, I've got a backup to use instead of having to use a pump sprayer for all that stuff. But
okay.
so far it's
Yeah,
been pretty reliable. He's only had to fix one electronic part on it in about the decade I've had it, you know.
that's
So
good. I'm
yeah.
running through these things like yearly right now.
Oh yeah. And those pump
Yeah,
sprayers, the gaskets on them, I always keep
yeah,
the extra gaskets in the thing because those wear out fast. Yeah.
yeah. They do. It's crazy. What was I about to say? So, I mean, say you sell tons of geckos. So, what's
Mhm.
kind of like your grace period before you actually start selling them after when they hatch? So, how long do
Sure.
you keep them before they? They hatch.
It depends on the species. I would say for the toughest things like a Leachianus or crested, like a couple of months.
Hmm.
It's basically enough time where I know it's growing normally, it's metabolizing food, I'm seeing normal fecal matter, it's not showing any problems, so it's safe to sell. But like when I used to breed Fantasticus, I would get them to like 4 or 5 months old. And I was extremely picky about what time of year that I would be willing to ship them.
Hmm.
Um, Tanopus carpi, I would raise for 6 months because the babies were so delicate,
Yeah.
just to make sure they were solid and eating and they do well for the next person that got them.
Yeah.
But most species, I would say in the 2 month range, a portion of them after that 3 months, and then on very rare exceptions, variable.
So I had a question from Matt. He asked, "So what are you feeding your Aussie Leaftail hatchlings, and how
Sure.
big are they out the egg?
Yeah. Primarily crickets that are supplemented in shaken in calcium.
What size
I would
crickets are
say,
those?
what's that?
What size crickets are those? Like pinheads, quarter
It's
inch?
it's dependent on the size of the gecko. My
Yeah.
general rule is if you go from tympanum to well, ear to ear on a gecko's head, like here's the head lengthwise, here's the head widthwise. The cricket should be about the size of the width. And it can be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, but you just don't want to go massive on that.
Yeah.
I've heard arguments both ways on cricket sizes, like nobody's checking the size of the invert that it eats in the wild, but animals also die doing stuff in the wild.
Yeah.
And they aren't
They
trapped in
might
an
get eaten
enclosure
from the
where
thing
it's
they're trying.
try and eat it or starve. So
Yeah.
I always try and be cognitive of size, and if I see something too big, I'll get rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the width of the head is basically the answer on that. And I do crickets for those. Yeah.
And to blow everybody's mind, how many crickets do you get in your orders?
On an average week, 10 to 12,000 in the busy period a
Golly.
year. When things are down and cool, probably about 5, 6,000. Yeah.
Man, that's crazy.
So plus
Whew.
other supplemental foods, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So you brought up like the snails. Do you feed your plate of snails?
I currently I put supplemental calcium in there.
Okay.
I think it's really more necessary with the larger ones, and
Yeah.
it's good for the smaller ones if you have clean parasite free ones to feed them. Back in the day when you really just couldn't get them anywhere, because I live in the Midwest, because I love to cook, I go to the Asian grocery store all the time, and
Yes.
sometimes they have live snails there. So if they're size appropriate, I would get them, and they would definitely eat them. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
those are mainly for females, especially like your grabbed ones, or just in general, you're just like,
I
here,
just let
take them,
all of
take
them
them,
eat
take them.
them because, yeah, they weren't super expensive and they were good for them.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say anything that's like Sakura size or bigger, especially like Henkeli, Fimbriatus, Giganteus, the really big ones, they
Mhm.
all have high calcium needs, but the bigger they are, the more those
More
calcium
than
needs are.
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So I got a few questions left.
Oh, yeah.
So you do this full time, right?
Hmm.
And so what's some good solid advice for someone that wants to try to be full time or have aspirations of doing this full time?
Sure. The number one thing I would say is never work with something just for money. Only work with stuff you want to work, because everybody I've ever met in this industry, and I love what I do, everybody I've ever met that was burnt out started working with other stuff that they didn't want to work with because they thought they could make.
Yeah.
The flip side of that coin is it's expensive to run a large collection. It's around a K plus a month. So the financial aspect is a thing too. I used to keep, I think at my peak, I probably kept it was about 125, maybe a few more species. And I was down there like 10 plus hours, 7 nights a week, every single day to keep up with things. And the sad truth of it is there's some species that I may like a lot, but the general public will like the pictures, but they do not care about buying it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Either because it's too small or it's just there's other stuff they like more, like a lot of pachypactylus. There's a few species that will move, but a few species that won't. And I would not dissuade someone who's doing it as a business from keeping a few things that don't make money. I do. I kept some of my absolute favorite ones, and I know I take a L on them, and that's fine. I don't care. Keeps my head in the game, and I enjoy them. But when you're keeping like 40 species of things that nobody's buying, you also have to keep in mind what's fair for that gecko, what versus what you want, because you have
Yeah.
all those babies that are turning into subadults and then adults, and nobody's buying them. What are you going to do with them? The only thing you can do is wholesale them off, or if it's in your head to do it, you can feed them off to lizard-eating lizards.
Yeah.
I don't like doing that. If something's born completely deformed and unsurvivable, I'll do it, but I won't do it to a healthy lizard.
Yeah.
So I was basically giving them away to friends, wholesaling to distributors and people I knew that vended shows. And I just didn't think it was the best thing for those animals. So I just cut it down to a couple and only breeding a few that aren't that popular. I can find them homes because it isn't that overall mass of geckos like it was before.
Yeah.
I've given some of them to school teachers locally. That's also a good source to give your retired animals to, like at the point where they stop breeding, but not at the point where they're so old that they aren't going to have much life left. Because one, you're helping a next generation have an interest in wildlife. I have a network of teachers in St. Louis and some in Illinois that I know stuff to. And the flip side of that coin, it's not why I do it, but he asked about being a business, so this is an answer. A lot of them can give you a tax form, which makes it a deduction as well at the end of the year
Or,
for doing that donation. So you're doing them a favor and yourself a favor. Perfectly.
nice.
Do not count on the maximum number of clutches of everything you have to be pure profit, because to keep things going, you're going to have to retain a portion of those for bloodline trade outs every few years to, depending on how long the longevity of the breeding is for the animal. You're going to have to be able to not sell all of them to keep it going long term. Now, a species like Ebanawi that'll breed for about 3-ish years, that's not long. So you're going to have to do
Yeah.
holdbacks very regularly, and that's going to
Yeah.
factor into what you're doing with it. A species like Leachianus that will produce fertile eggs for over 20 years. I'm 50. How many holdbacks do I have to do? I mean, I'm not talking about it that way, but you know what I'm saying. Maybe
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
twice more in my
Definitely.
life. Maybe.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's a big factor. Another thing too is and this is a strategy I like to employ. If I'm going to sell adult breeders, I will breed them for about 50% of their breeding life and have the next generation ready to rotate. That way they still have value and the person knows how old they are when they buy them, and they'll still get some production out of it. And you have
Oh
to be
yeah.
very careful about that because there are people in this hobby that will sell you old animals. I've bought them many times. They just are not going to do things. And some good things to look at in the pics and ask for good pics is megacephaly. Most geckos, as they get older, the heads will get not ridiculous, but larger and larger. Look around the eyes and the mouth because you'll see a little bit, not as crisp and bright, a little bit more droop, a little bit more sink if they're older. Um, and their behavior, you can tell the difference between a gecko that lives for 5 years. If it's 1 or 2 years old, it's moving around and it's very healthy looking. If it's towards the end of its age, it's not moving the same as that species should be. It can still
Yeah.
move around, it can still eat, but it's not going to be the same thing. So
Okay.
yeah, I'm very discerning about who I'll buy from, what I'll buy, and from who. In trades, I'm even more picky.
Yeah. So actually, I do have some other questions now too, because I forget.
Yeah,
So, what are your requirements when doing a new project or getting new geckos? Because I know, like, as I've been in, mine are starting to evolve. So for me,
sure.
it's like, can besides getting my CBB, am I able to get wild caught blood if I need to introduce new blood? So I'm not like, overbreeding or cross, like
Sure.
interbreeding mom to dad, or not mom, but mom to son, and all that good stuff.
Right.
So,
It's
what
it's
about
an
yours?
excellent question, and I'm gonna answer it honestly. Um, you have some species like Phelsuma clemeri
Yeah,
or Pachydaculus fasciatus that came in small numbers like 15, 20 years ago. Okay.
yeah,
And I'm going to use another analogy after I say this. Reptiles have a slower degradation rate than mammals do when it comes to inbreeding. Those Pachydaculus fasciatus that came through from somebody in Oklahoma had 2 males and 1 female over 20 years ago. There are still people in the hobby breeding them, and they're not showing any health problems, and they rarely even show pattern change. Some species are much quicker to have problems than others. Same thing with like Phelsuma clemeri. They've been around for over 20 years. They're still breeding strong and healthy, so I think it's okay. Would
yeah,
I prefer to have multiple bloodlines? Absolutely. If you can get ones from other people and outcross them to yours, that's ideal. But the reality of it is a lot of the species in the hobby, there is a certain level of either it's going to be inbred or it's not going to be in the hobby. It's
yeah.
not going to be in it. And the other example I'm going to throw, kind of two-part, things like mourning geckos in Heteronocha, Hemiphilodactylus typus, and some locations in Actus pelagicus, they're parthenogenic. And they'll have like 3 generations in 2 years. And they're still doing fine, and they're still healthy, and there's no problems. And you take things like leopard geckos, where it should be outcrossed in every possible chance, but some of these are like 30, 40 generations plus inbred and still healthy. I think the line you have to draw, and there's some leopard geckos that aren't, is when it's genetically showing a flaw like a neurological disorder that causes the
Okay,
animal problems. That is when you have to go, done.
yeah.
I mean, you don't do that to the gecko, but
No.
just to clarify for people that are sensitive out there watching, you don't, yeah, but you end the project. It's done. There's other stuff you can work on. There's absolutely no reason to reproduce something that's going to have a hard life and problems when you can produce something that's going to be healthy. Now,
Right.
that being said, there are some species that have come in enough numbers that specialists that really pay attention, and you have to go to them, keep track of their original bloodlines and they know what they have. There's species that still come in on occasion. So you can constantly, and I love that, constantly add new bloodlines, or you can import things from like Europe and do
Yeah,
bloodline swaps. I have several people I do that with, usually at least once a year. And it can help keep your stuff fresher and better, because I think the more diverse it is important. You should do it as much as possible, but some people that are new will think it's an end game and it's the end of the world if you do it, and that's just not the truth of reptiles. So
yeah,
they can take that or leave it for whatever they want, but those
yeah,
animals aren't having health problems. Would I do it with a mammal that showed problems? No, no, I wouldn't. Because if it's starting to have problems, then that's when it is a problem. It should stop. So,
gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, like it's, like we can't get new stuff from Australia, so it's like, do
No,
I keep do I keep pursuing my Aussie stuff, or do I start
sure,
going into Southeast Asia, which that's what I'm starting
sure.
to go into right now with my
Yeah,
Cerdaclys. Like I said, I can
yeah.
run a lot of Cerdaclys. I mean, you always see the main ones coming through, like Erigenisis or sometimes Elox,
Pulchellus and
Pachellus. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, so that's where my mindset is starting to go now. This like
sure.
that's why I'm starting to get into the year planets as well
Hmm.
because you always see wild caughts. I was like, it's not like I want to buy wild caughts. I want to
Sure.
just when it's time, go ahead bring some new blood in to put back into my CBBs. So we can have a wide variety of
Oh
blood
yeah.
coming through. Yeah,
Yeah, and it will keep them stronger longer. It's
yeah,
a question of like with the Clemeri and the other ones like the Fasciatus that have been around forever.
yeah,
Um, it's okay to keep breeding them like that until there's a problem. If there's a problem,
yeah,
it needs to stop.
yeah,
I think another big issue that we have in herpetoculture as far as bloodlines go is I'll have three different people tell me they have three different bloodlines that I know came in as 2.1 animals 20
Yeah.
years ago because they bought theirs from two different people. And it could be that they're dishonest. It could be that they just don't know. So I'm not going to get
Yeah.
accusatory with them or get rude because that's a waste of time. But you kind of have to know what came from where if you're going to claim it's a different bloodline. The
Yeah.
only way you can do that is if you can trace it back to the original source. Because if you can't, you don't know that. And in most cases, that's not the case. It's
Yeah.
just people buying one animal from this person and one animal from this person and saying they're not related because they bought it from two different sources. And a lot of times that's not the case.
Yeah. Definitely. All right. My last question I got. So, what have been some of your biggest failures in this hobby, and then what have you learned from those?
Mm-hmm. Agamora persica. It's a Persian spider gecko. I want those again. I know what I screwed up on them. With
Yeah.
most hard shell eggs from desert species, they need ambient humidity, but a dry surface so that the egg
Mm.
doesn't rot or go bad. And I probably produced, I don't know the exact number, but I'd say like 20 to 28, somewhere in there, fertile eggs the first year I had them. And evidently, with them, they need some moisture in the thing that the egg is sitting on, which is an anomaly with hard shelled eggs because that's not normal, but they apparently must lay them in pretty moist burrows or
Okay.
something like that. So by the end of the season, everything was fully developed, but because the substrate the eggs were sitting in was too dry, the eggs got harder and dried, even though the air wasn't enough. And they died fully developed, not being able to get through that egg that was a little too hard. But if I ever get the chance to get them again, out of over 200 species of reptiles and amphibians I've bred, that's the one that got me that I didn't. So I want that one back bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know what to
I,
do with them when I get them. I'll be able to
yeah.
breed them. So, yeah.
Say, are they here in the U.S. or would you have to like import those in?
No. I've heard
No.
rumors that there are some in Europe, but I don't know
Okay.
that it's an absolute fact. But I'm actively working on trying to figure out if that's really true
Hmm.
because I was sent to one person that supposedly had it, and when I talked to them, he was like, "I had them like 15 years ago." I'm like, "Okay, well, thank you for your time." So I mean, there very well might be. There's more of a diversity of geckos in Europe than there is here. It's very possible that someone has them. I just haven't found it. So if anybody
Okay.
listening knows if somebody that's currently breeding and producing and selling them, shoot me a DM. I'd love to know that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we did get one question from the chat.
Mhm.
There's like, I guess there's a rumor going around, I guess, saying, is it true that Joe got out of breeding Stropharis, and would you care to share why?
No, I still produce them and post pictures of the babies. I got out of a couple species of them. Uh, the last round I did with a bunch of them was Ciliaris, Spinningeris, Williamsy, and Tainacauda. To be honest, Williamsy sell pretty slowly and they aren't worth a lot. And more importantly, they were my least favorite of the four species that I worked with. So I was just like, in order to add a new species, I tend to let one go. I let those go. Spinningeris I liked a lot, but they need a higher heat to really be successful with them than a lot of the other
Okay.
Stropharis. Like to breed really well, mine only did it in the high 90s, low 100s as a hot spot. And a
Okay.
lot of people keep them cooler than that, and they survive it like a crested without enough heat, but they don't really produce well. And I went through 1 year with three different people. They were like, I can't get it to go. And I'm like, it needs to be around 100. And they would send me the temps, and it's like, well, it's 85. That's good enough. I'm like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Trust me, I've been breeding them a long time.
Okay.
And I
It's good
just
to know because
honestly
I'm actually getting
got
some.
frustrated and got rid of it. And I probably shouldn't have based off those people. I probably should have. But I do
Yeah.
still have Tainacauda and I do still have Ciliaris. So
Yeah. Yes,
Tainacauda
because
will always be in here.
yeah, that's like, I did get a Ciliaris from Joe at the last October Tinley, so he is
Yep.
doing
Where I
some
did the
Stropharis.
Europlatus talk. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That
Yeah.
was so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I said actually, I forgot. I am getting a spinach airs as well. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
doing a
nice.
trade.
Nice.
I'm doing a
Keep 'em
trade with
warm.
somebody else.
Keep 'em
Yeah.
warm.
So
Yeah.
thank you for that one.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, I get rumors like that. Like I guess anybody does here and there. I had somebody come
Yeah.
up to my table at the last Tinley and they're like, I heard you're getting out of geckos. I'm like I'm getting out of oxygen? Are you insane? No, no, I'm not. No offense, man. I'm sure you heard some BS rumor, but no. I've been doing this
Yeah.
a very long time and I'll continue to do this for a very long time. So yeah,
Glad to hear that one.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I love looking every time you post on fauna. I'm like, oh, let's look at this. Let's look at the
Oh
list.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
just
I
get
got
happy
another
seeing that.
list I'm gonna drop either Monday or Tuesday this week. So yeah.
Cool. Perfect. All right, Joe. Where can everybody find you at, man?
Joe Hupp, just my regular account. Um, I would send me a DM because I get so many requests and I'm very close to the max of 5,000 people that I really only pick and choose if I see somebody has a lot of gecko stuff. But if there's somebody that's interested in geckos and I might not see that on their timeline and they send me a DM, I'll go ahead and accept that. Another place that's kind of unlimited to be able to reach me is Joe Hupp Geckos on Facebook. Since Facebook got wonky about live sales, I haven't made a post on that business page since then. I don't know if that was like 7, 8 years ago. So there's no new posts, but I actively do check the DMs. So if people click that, they can always get a hold of me through it. I post on Fauna, but since Fauna's changed, I don't know. I think I'm finally at a point where I'm gonna go ahead and start posting on Morph Market before too long. It's kind of where everybody's moved to. And I don't personally know Darien, but I think it's interesting that if you get on Fauna, because you know how much pop-ups it has,
Yeah. Yeah.
half of the pop-ups I get are for Morph Market.
Yeah.
Like,
Morph
good
Market,
business move,
Dubia,
dude.
all. Yeah.
Right. I'm like, I can't believe the guy from Fauna's letting you do this, man, but go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah. Because Fauna just did an update, right?
They did, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a new server, a new format.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
honestly, I hate to say it, but I don't like it as much as the last one. And I will probably still post on it, but there's so much pop-ups, people don't want to go see it.
Yeah.
So, it before too long, I'm going to be doing Morph Market. The only thing is like with me, and this is the reason I've drugged my feet on it, and maybe for all I know, Morph Market's changed. I need to look into it. But I breed a lot of different species. So my list is like in the middle of the peak season towards October, it's big.
Yeah.
So for me to go through and take pictures of every single thing that I'm going to put on there, it would take me 3, 4 days of just taking
Yeah.
pictures plus taking care of the collection. So I think what I'm going to do instead of posting everything, because I don't want to get in a category and shove everybody back 4 or 5 pages. I
Yeah.
think what I'm going to do, since I can't post a list, is I'm just going to post like the premium geckos, the really rare stuff or expensive
Yeah.
stuff, or the things that I know people would find interesting and really like. I will post the best sellers on there and the
Yeah.
things that are the coolest that might draw people to want to look more at it. And the
That's
rest of
it.
the stuff I'll just put on my table at 10. So,
There you go.
yeah.
Yeah. Anytime I get on Morph Market, the first place I go to is other gecko section. That's the
Yeah.
first place I go to. I skip
Yeah.
every single one. I skip Chihuahuas. I skip Cresties, Lychees, Gargs, because like
There's
even they
so
even
much
have
in it.
yeah, yeah. And
It's
it's
flooded.
like, oh man, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
love looking at that part because you get to see all the stuff that you normally don't get to see just out
Yeah.
and about. It's
Yeah.
like I saw Cerdactis puchelis on there.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
what else did I see on there? Well, it's like that's where I found my Homophilus fasciatus. Found them on
Nice.
there. Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
And then I reached out to some other people that had uh, or had listings on there as well for because I was like, I want to get me a nice big group of Homophilus fasciatus.
Sure.
Like I said, I got the
Sure.
1.3 coming. I found a couple other people that will sell me a few of theirs, so I could at least probably try to get at least a. I'm trying to go for like a 5.5 just to get
Sure.
a nice program going with them.
Nice solid group. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
You should
and
reach
the
out
market
to
is just different.
David Kelly on Facebook. I'm pretty sure he
I
produced.
got him
Oh, is that who
already.
you got him from?
No, no, no.
Oh, okay.
I reached out to him, but he's actually going to be on the pod talking about Homophilus fasciata.
Oh, okay,
So
cool.
yeah,
Yeah, I
so
was gonna say he'd be a great source, and I think he works at the Sedgwick County Zoo, if I'm remembering. I know it's
okay,
a zoo. I thought it
yeah,
was that one, but it's at least a zoo.
yeah. I reached out to him when I saw it on Work Market. I found his IG. I was like, hey, you still work with these? He's like,
Yep.
yeah. I was like, cool. I was like,
Yeah.
I really want some, but also, do you want to be on the pod to talk about these? Because these are really awesome.
Sure.
He's like,
Yeah. In my
yeah,
opinion, he's one of the better U.S. breeders because he's pretty diverse. While he doesn't
yeah,
have a massive collection, all of the stuff he has is either intermediate or by some people considered difficult to breed.
mhm,
And from what I've seen over time on what's come across my feed, he's done really well with a lot of cool stuff. And that
yeah,
snakes, amphibians, lizards, it's not just one genre.
yeah. Yeah, because I think his IG is called like David's Herpetology or something. So yeah, he has a wide variety, which is really cool. I like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
good dude. I know he produced diamond pythons not long ago. And you have to
Okay.
raise those right and you have to cool those just right to really get
Yeah,
them to
because those
go.
have to get really. Yeah, because I listened to was it NPR and
Hmm.
Eric. He's always talking about how you got to cool them real, got to get them really cold.
Oh yeah.
And he was like, I missed my timing this year, so I came to breed them. I was like, damn. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really. Yeah, they're really strict.
Yeah. A lot of people in the first times they cool, it's something I run into helping people out with before is they're afraid to go too cold, which the too cold is actually the temp that they know they should go to, so they'll go in
Hmm.
between. And
Yeah.
then they'll end up having problems because those animals are still metabolizing some and they're losing weight because they're not shut down from a hard enough pool like most things in the pool are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Matt said you can use a representative photo for Morph Market. And so instead of taking photos of all your the real rare stuff that doesn't have morphs or whatever like that, you can use
Oh,
a representative
really?
photo.
Thanks for throwing that comment in, man. That's awesome. I didn't know that. For stuff that's monotypic and doesn't vary, I could
Yeah,
definitely do
yeah,
that. Yeah,
definitely, yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Very good to know. Appreciate that. Yeah,
Well, on that note, so we're gonna go ahead and get out of here. Joe,
cool.
definitely, man, I appreciate you coming on.
Oh,
Like,
for
I would
sure.
love to have you come back on again, talk about some African geckos. Like I said, I
Yeah,
kind of wanted, I did want to talk about the Tenopus, but we'll maybe
sure.
another time we'll get to that.
Oh,
Like I
yeah.
said,
I've done
I
a
was
lot of South African species or
yeah,
Southern
and
Africa. Yeah, a lot of
no,
Namibia.
I'm definitely I want to talk about like a lot of the arboreal stuff because I'm an arboreal guy. I
Sure.
love arboreal stuff. So
Okay.
arboreal African, I'll be down to talk about. And
Done.
generally anything I'm down to talk about with if it's
Sure.
geckos. So
Sure.
definitely would love to have you back on
Awesome.
in the near future.
Sounds good, dude.
All right, appreciate it, man. Have a great night.
For sure. Have a good one.
All right.